story credited to Ethan Miller. My name's Ethan, and I don't normally do trips like this, but last fall, my girlfriend Lisa convinced me to book a weekend at this cabin she found online. It was meant to be an escape, nothing too fancy, just a quick break from the usual routine. We'd spend 2 nights in a quiet place, no Wi-Fi, no work calls. Just me, Lisa, and 2 of our best friends, Matt and Jessica. Seemed like the perfect idea, right? The cabin was off the beaten path, about a 3-hour drive from our town. The roads got narrower the closer we got, winding through thick woods. I remember Lisa being glued to her phone, checking the map to make sure we were still heading the right way. Matt was driving in the car ahead of us with Jessica, and we were all on edge, partly because we hadn't seen another car or house for miles. When we finally pulled up, the place looked, well, it looked pretty much how you'd expect an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere to look. It was small, a little worn down, but not in a creepy way, more like in an old vacation home kind of way. There was a big porch, a lake just down the hill, and a fire pit out back. Honestly, it was exactly what we signed up for. The host, some guy named Dennis, had left a note on the kitchen table. It was polite, short. "Welcome. Hope you enjoy your stay. There's a list of instructions in the binder. Don't forget to lock the doors at night and be mindful of the local wildlife." Local wildlife. I remember we joked about it, Lisa saying something about raccoons or maybe a stray deer. We had no idea what was coming. That first night, everything was fine. We cooked burgers on the grill, drank a few beers by the fire, and shared stories. I'm not gonna lie, it was peaceful, like the kind of quiet you don't realize you need until you get out of the city. The only weird moment came when we heard this rustling in the trees. It was faint, just outside the light of the fire pit. I chalked it up to an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But Lisa, she got this uneasy look, like she wasn't so sure. "You hear that?" she asked, staring into the dark woods. "It sounds off." Matt laughed it off. "Probably just some deer. We're in the middle of the forest, Liz." We all shrugged it off. But Lisa was right. Something about the sound felt off, too slow, like someone or something was pacing. We headed inside a little later, locked the doors, and called it a night. The cabin had 2 bedrooms upstairs, one for me and Lisa, the other for Matt and Jessica. The stairs creaked as we went up, which added to the whole cabin in the woods vibe. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to Lisa shifting beside me. "What's wrong?" I whispered. She didn't say anything at first, just stared out the window toward the woods. "I thought I heard someone walking," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I listened. Nothing but the wind brushing the trees outside. I told her it was probably an animal and pulled her closer, trying to shake the unease. But the thing is, I couldn't shake it either. Not completely. The next morning, we all woke up early, feeling a little groggy, but ready to make the most of the day. We were sitting on the porch drinking coffee when Matt noticed something. He pointed to a small clearing in the trees just down the hill from the cabin. "Is that a trail?" he asked, standing up. It wasn't marked, but sure enough, there was this narrow dirt path, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. None of us had seen it when we arrived, and it wasn't mentioned in the Airbnb description. Matt wanted to check it out, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It felt too out of place. Lisa was on the fence, but Jessica straight up refused. "I don't think we should go down there," she said, and her voice had this edge to it, like she knew something we didn't. Matt, being Matt, ignored her. "Come on, it's just a path. Maybe it leads to another part of the lake." Against my better judgment, we went. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, and the further we went, the darker it got. The trees grew taller, the branches seemed to block out more and more of the light. After about 10 minutes of walking, we came across a small, broken-down shed. It wasn't much, just some old wood slapped together, but the door was slightly open. "No way," I said, stepping back. "This is someone's property." Matt shrugged. "No one's been here for years, man. Look at it." I didn't care. There was something about the place that felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. We turned around, and that's when I noticed Jessica was gone. Just gone. I called out her name, but she didn't answer. Lisa's face went pale, and Matt ran back down the trail, shouting her name. My heart was racing, my mind scrambling to figure out where she could have gone. We weren't that far from the cabin. How could she have just disappeared? Lisa stayed with me, trying to keep calm, but I could see the panic building in her eyes. "We need to go back," she said. "Maybe she went to the cabin." When we got back, Jessica was sitting on the porch like nothing had happened. She was just sitting there. Matt rushed up to her, angry and confused. "Where the hell did you go?" But Jessica didn't seem to understand the question. She just looked at us, her eyes a little glassy, and said, "I didn't go anywhere." That night, I didn't sleep. None of us did. We locked every door, double-checked every window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was out there, watching. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. They were slow, deliberate, moving around the cabin. I lay there, frozen, listening as they circled the house. I thought about waking Lisa, but something told me not to. I didn't want her to panic. When the footsteps finally stopped, I tiptoed to the window and peeked out. Nothing, just darkness and trees swaying in the wind. The next morning, I told Matt and Lisa about the footsteps, but Matt brushed it off. "You were probably half asleep, man. We're all on edge." Maybe he was right. But that didn't explain the look on Jessica's face when I mentioned it. She hadn't said a word all morning, but when I brought up the footsteps, she froze. Just for a second, like she knew exactly what I was talking about. We packed up that afternoon, cut the trip short. None of us spoke much on the drive home, and we never talked about that weekend again. Not once. But every now and then I find myself thinking about it, about the footsteps, about that unmarked trail, about Jessica's strange, empty look. And I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't left? Story credited to Kyle Matthews. My name is Kyle Matthews, and this is a story I've never told anyone before. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm sharing it now, but maybe getting it out will help me make sense of what happened. It started as a pretty normal weekend. My girlfriend Lena and I had been talking about taking a trip somewhere quiet, away from the chaos of the city. You know how it is, work piling up, endless emails, that constant buzz of urban life. It was exhausting. So we decided on a weekend getaway, just the two of us, at a rental cabin about 2 hours away. Nothing fancy, just a secluded spot by a lake where we could disconnect and relax for a couple of days. We booked the place online, one of those short-term rental websites. The pictures looked perfect, cozy, small, surrounded by woods, with a clear view of the lake from the back deck. Exactly what we needed. The guy who rented it out, Dan, seemed nice enough. His reviews were solid, and he responded quickly when I asked a few questions about the place. We headed out late Friday afternoon. I remember how excited Lena was. She kept talking about how nice it'd be to just unwind, to leave our phones off for a few days and pretend the world didn't exist. I agreed. At least I thought I did. The drive was fine at first. We stopped at a gas station, grabbed some snacks, Lena's guilty pleasure is those sour gummy worms, and made good time. But the closer we got to the cabin, the more the road narrowed. By the time we turned off onto the dirt road leading up to the place, it felt like we were miles away from anything. No cell service, no signs of life except for the trees pressing in from both sides. I remember joking, well, if we break down, at least we'll be easy prey for a horror movie. Lena laughed, but I could tell she was getting a little uneasy too. Something about the isolation. It felt different than we imagined. Still, we brushed it off. It was all part of the charm, right? We finally arrived just before sunset. The cabin was exactly like the pictures, small, rustic, and surrounded by trees. The lake was just a short walk down a path out back, and the air smelled like pine and fresh water. It should have been perfect. But the moment we stepped inside, something felt off. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. The first thing we noticed was the smell. It wasn't strong, just this faint, musty odor, like the place hadn't been aired out in a while. I figured it was because the cabin hadn't been rented recently, so we opened a few windows, tried to get some air circulating. The inside was as advertised, a small living room with a fireplace, a kitchenette, and a single bedroom. Quaint, simple. But there was something about the way the light filtered through the windows that made the place feel darker, more closed in. Lena seemed a little tense too, but she brushed it off, telling me she just needed to settle in. We unpacked, made a quick dinner, and then decided to walk down to the lake before it got too dark. The path was narrow, barely a foot wide, with tall grass brushing against our legs as we made our way down. It was quiet, unnervingly so. No wind, no animals, not even the sound of insects, just the crunch of our shoes on the dirt. When we got to the lake, the water was perfectly still. No ripples, no movement, just this flat, glassy surface reflecting the fading light of the sky. Lena and I stood there for a while, just staring. It was peaceful, I guess, but it didn't feel right. Something about the stillness was unnatural. Lena broke the silence first. "Does it seem weird to you? Like, too quiet?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's weird. We didn't stay at the lake long." By the time we got back to the cabin, it was dark. I tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. But the longer we were in that cabin, the heavier the air felt. Every creak, every pop of the wood settling sent a shiver down my spine. Around 11, we decided to call it a night. Lena went to brush her teeth and I started locking up the doors. I remember standing at the back door, staring out into the trees. There was something there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, watching. I shook it off, told myself I was being paranoid, and headed to the bedroom. Lena was already in bed, scrolling through her phone, even though there was no signal. "Just checking," she said with a half laugh. I smiled, but I wasn't really feeling it. We turned off the lights and lay there in the dark. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt that same presence. Like someone or something was just outside the window, staring at me through the darkness. I didn't want to freak Lena out, so I stayed quiet, hoping it was just my imagination. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. There was a sound outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but there wasn't any wind. Then I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon, something like that. But no, it was something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaves just outside the cabin. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Lena was still asleep, her breathing soft and steady beside me. I didn't want to wake her. I didn't want her to panic, but the footsteps kept getting closer. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could and moved to the window, careful not to make a sound. I pulled the curtain back, just a crack, and looked out. Nothing. Just the trees swaying in the faint light of the moon. But I knew what I heard. Someone or something had been walking out there, watching us. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was just an animal after all. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning we packed up early. I didn't tell Lena what I heard. I didn't want her to think I was crazy, or worse, that I was scared, but I was. We drove home in silence. No music, no conversation, just the sound of the tires on the road. It wasn't until we got back to the city, when we finally had cell service again, that Lena's phone buzzed. She looked down at it, confused, and then her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight. She turned her phone toward me. There on the screen was a message. "Thank you for staying at our cabin. We hope you enjoyed your stay. We look forward to hosting you again soon." I frowned. "That's normal, right? Like an automatic thing?" Lena shook her head. "It's not from the rental site. It's from Dan." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. We hadn't given Dan our personal numbers. The only contact we had with him was through the website. Story credited to Eric Winters. You ever have one of those moments where something feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That was the start of the weekend Jenna and I planned. Simple, just a weekend getaway to break out of our routine. A cabin, about 3 hours north of the city. The idea sounded perfect at the time. Fresh air, no phones, no work, just us and the peace and quiet. What could go wrong? We found the place on some rental site, had decent reviews. The guy Tom, who owned it, seemed normal enough, sent me a bunch of directions, places to eat, all that, even threw in a "hope you enjoy your stay" message that felt personal. That's rare these days. Anyway, Friday afternoon we packed the car, threw in some snacks, and hit the road. The first couple of hours were smooth. Once we got out of the city, the highway opened up, and the stress of the week just seemed to melt away. I remember Jenna laughing, flipping through old playlists on her phone, finding songs we hadn't heard since college. There's something about old music that makes you feel like everything's simpler, you know? But things shifted as we left the highway behind. We turned onto this narrow, winding road and the GPS lost signal almost immediately. No bars, no Wi-Fi, just trees on both sides. It was beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it felt closed in. Jenna noticed it too. She got quiet, kept glancing out the window, her phone in her lap, useless. "Is this the right way?" she asked. I could hear the edge in her voice. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure," I said, gripping the wheel. "Just a few more miles. It's probably one of those places that's so remote it barely exists on a map, but that unease." We arrived just as the sun was setting. The cabin wasn't exactly what I expected. The pictures made it look charming, you know, like something out of a magazine. But in person it looked tired. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, and there was this faint smell, damp, like old wood that had been sitting out in the rain for too long. I shrugged it off. We were here after all. No sense in turning back. "Home sweet home," I said, forcing a smile. Jenna didn't respond. She just grabbed her bag and followed me inside. The inside wasn't much better. Small living room, a couch that had seen better days, a kitchen with old appliances. But the part that bothered me most? The silence. No humming fridge, no ticking clock, just nothing. Jenna looked around, rubbing her arms. "We should have brought a radio," she muttered. I nodded, trying to shake the feeling that this was a mistake. "I'll start a fire," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "Let's make the best of it." We settled in, made some dinner, simple stuff. After we ate, we decided to take a walk down to the lake. It was only a short trail from the cabin. The night air was crisp, cool. The lake stretched out like a mirror under the darkening sky, not a ripple in sight. It should have been peaceful, but the silence here, it wasn't calming, it was thick. Jenna stood close to me, her arms crossed. I could tell she wasn't feeling it either. "I don't like this," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the water. "It's too quiet. Come on, it's what we wanted, right?" I tried to laugh. "Just you and me, no distractions." But deep down, I felt it too. Something wasn't right. We went back to the cabin. Jenna read for a bit while I tried to distract myself with my phone, but of course, no service. The isolation felt more like a cage than a retreat. Every creak, every shift of the wind outside made me jump. By 10, Jenna was ready to crash. "I'm exhausted," she said, standing up and stretching. I nodded, though I wasn't feeling tired. Not yet. I told her I'd lock up and join her in a bit. She disappeared into the bedroom, and I stayed up, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace. That's when I heard it, the first real sound since we'd gotten here. Footsteps outside, slow, deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest. I froze, listening. They circled the cabin, crunching softly on the gravel, pausing occasionally. It felt like whoever it was. They were taking their time, like they knew we were inside and wanted us to feel their presence. I stood, moving quietly to the window. I didn't see anything at first, just shadows, trees. Then I saw it, a figure barely visible between the trees, tall, hunched, moving slowly. I ducked away from the window, my heart racing. I wanted to wake Jenna, but I didn't want to scare her. I kept telling myself it was probably just someone from a nearby cabin, maybe a late-night hiker. But why would they be out here walking around in the dark? I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and crawled into bed next to Jenna. She was already asleep, breathing softly, oblivious to the growing tension in my chest. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the footsteps, faint, almost rhythmic, and then, nothing. The next morning the air felt lighter, but I couldn't shake the unease. I stepped outside to get some fresh air and saw them, footprints, big ones, too big to be Jenna's. They circled the cabin, just like I had heard the night before. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't want to say anything to Jenna, she was already on edge. So I made an excuse, told her I had a work emergency and that we needed to cut the trip short. She didn't argue, just packed up quietly. Maybe she felt it too. We left around noon, driving down that same winding road in silence. Neither of us spoke much on the drive back. It wasn't until we hit the main highway, with cars and trucks passing by, that I started to relax. The city, noisy, crowded, never felt so good. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that we weren't alone that night. Someone or something was out there watching us, and we'll never know why.